second. This is a marketing team run by quants. And for
Yeah,
basically the
exactly.
history of humanity, marketing teams were run by creatives. And this doesn't mean you don't need incredible creatives. It just means that the ratio, marketing used to be 100% a creative game. And now I think it is 20% amazing creative, 80% incredible quantitative analysis.
All right, Michele, thank you so much for coming on. Really excited. We're going to have a packed 45 minutes here. Just start getting started. You have a fascinating background when we look in your journey into e-commerce. It would be great if you could run us through, how you got into e-commerce and then how those experiences ended up, leading to Clearbank.
Yeah, of course. So I think the first thing is that I've been a serial entrepreneur from the very beginning. It didn't matter what it was. I went to school for engineering. I ended up in engineering because my parents told me I could study anything I wanted as long as it was engineering. And by the time I was in second year, I'm like, I'm going to be no good at this. So I'm going to build this little sustainable coffee shop on Queens campus. It's still there 14 years later. That was my first business. By the time I graduated, figured a worldwide supply of sturgeon caviar was down by 95% because the world had overfished the Caspian Sea. I was crazy enough to move to the east coast of Canada and build a fishery from scratch as my second business, believe it or not, which turned out to be an awesome business because chefs couldn't find the product. But then we went into a giant recession in 2008.
No one's buying caviar.
I found myself being 21 years old, selling the most superfluous luxury product in the middle of the biggest recession, not good times. And from there, recession got so bad, I took a corporate job. I ended up starting a daily deal e-commerce site with the same two guys that I built the fishery with. And this was really formative in my experiences because I learned it was super hard to raise capital. I remember we got one offer from a VC early on, and then we did $1 million in sales, and he still wanted 30% of the company for $500,000. And I was like, this is the worst deal ever. I remember learning that it's a true story. I don't think I've told that one very often. I remember learning that if we injected $1 into marketing and we made $2 the next day at a 50% margin, I could actually keep doing that and growing forever. And in those days, actually, the big arbitrage was in newspaper ads. We truly bought e-commerce. We bought newspaper ads to drive people to an e-commerce website. It got us such loyal customers because we literally taught people how to buy online for the first time. People would call our customer support number and be like, I don't really know how to do this. And then obviously they trusted your website, and so they just keep coming back. These are older generations. And then we grew, we acquired, 15 of our competitors. That e-commerce company is now publicly traded in Canada as Emerge Commerce, built another app that was early in the AI space that we sold to Groupon. And then I'm 28 years old and I get asked to join the cast of the Canadian version of Shark Tank.
Yeah.
And I just feel, Michael, like I'm such a runt of the litter. I'm the youngest by 30 years. I'm definitely the poorest of this group of people. And we're seeing 250 pitches. They're all e-commerce founders because no one wants to see a B2B SaaS business on Shark Tank, right? That's super boring. No one at home understands why you're building a piece of software or gives a shit.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting is, everyone's like, look, I'm here, willing to give up 5% of my company for $100,000. And you'd ask the e-commerce founders what they needed the capital for. And it was always two things. I need the capital for customer acquisition, which is Facebook and Google ads, or I need the capital for inventory. And I just got home one day and I'm talking to Andrew and I'm like, Andrew, why are people using the most expensive capital to do something that's repeatable and scalable? This is just crazy. That when you put $1 into Facebook, you get $3 out. And he was like, well, let's think about this. And so I went back the next day on the show. And the next time that I heard a pitch that sounded like this, I was like, okay, new deal type. I'll give you the $100,000 you're looking for. But instead of taking 5% of your business that'll own forever, I just want 5% of your revenue until you pay me back my capital plus a 6% flat fee. This won't be a loan. There'll be no personal guarantee or fixed payment timeline or compounding interest. This is truly just a rev share for the ad space. And honestly, the only hitch in my deal is I have to see your Facebook ad account, because I looked at my Facebook ad account every day for 4 hours. I know exactly what I'm looking for if you have a good return on ad spend. And, the rest is just like, was all like just crazy for us. I mean, we've now put more than $1.6 billion into 4,000 different companies. We're the largest e-commerce investor on the planet. Majority of those are e-commerce businesses. We started funding SaaS businesses and mobile apps earlier this year. So we
those
expanded.
are Deliverr businesses too.
Exactly. A lot of Deliverr businesses. And our view generally is like, before we existed, 50% of capital that went into companies, of venture capital dollars, went straight to Google and Facebook.
Yeah.
And that to me is just crazy. Like, founders should be using cheaper capital to do that. Use your venture dollars to either retain your company and own everything you're working for, or use your venture dollars to take, true high level risks.
Yeah.
Exactly. Product development, launching a new country, things where genuinely the downside is like everything falls apart. Not the downside is like, oh, you didn't quite make your return on your Facebook ads this month.
Yeah. And I think the first thing I was so interested with the Clearbank model, I had come from a little bit different landscape in more the Amazon seller ecosystem.
Right.
And that was, it was fascinating. I mean, you had I think at the time, like probably, 2018 when Clearbank started, around 2 million Amazon sellers, obviously growing really fast. There had to have been 5, 10, 20 different Amazon seller lending services at the time.
Yeah.
And I guess the question is two things. Number one, why do you think none of them were looking at this direct to consumer space with Facebook and Instagram ads? And then also conversely, why did you decide to focus on that space where no one else was looking? What did you see about that space that seemed different from the Amazon ecosystem with all these different third-party sellers, which ended up, I guess, not being as scalable, or I'm not entirely sure how you actually view that ecosystem.
Yeah, so we back a ton of Amazon sellers as well. I mean, a lot of them now are using Amazon ads to drive and grow your business. Here was the paradigm shift we needed to make. And so I actually think it's so funny when the bankers are like, oh, like, where did you do investment banking? And like, how, you know what I mean? Like, you must be a capital markets person. Make no mistake, I would love to have been one of those people, but I am a founder. My experience came from the fact that I was running an e-commerce store that I knew we had positive unit economics, and there was no good capital because people didn't think these were real businesses. So let's talk about the capital that did exist. There was a little bit of venture capital, but it was bank capital. And bank capital is fundamentally different because bank capital says, oh, Amazon seller, you look like you have an amazing business. Amazon seller, it looks like everybody's been, but I don't really know that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a personal guarantee on your business. And there's actually no underwriting involved in that. That's like, Michelle, do you own a house and do you have cash in your bank account? And to be honest, that's how everyone was treated. And so all 20 of those companies that were lending to Amazon businesses, they actually didn't understand those Amazon businesses. They just understood that the person behind those businesses. And you have to imagine, Michael, when we had this model in the early days, I mean, we went to Wall Street to raise our, all this capital that we were going to put out the door.
Yeah.
And 250 people told me and Andrew that we were crazy. They said, wait a second, you're having small businesses capital with no personal guarantees and like, you're just going to use this data. And I was like, yeah, because the data is indicative of how well their businesses are doing.
Yeah.
And I think the paradigm shift was less towards, were you operating a business on Amazon or Shopify or wherever? It was actually that there were data points we could take to see if these businesses made sense. And then the next part that really matters, the other thing, Michael, that people don't remember, and it's impossible to know, is like when we started doing this, our early cohorts, we had 20% default rates. Like we almost lost all of our money multiple times because you have no idea what you're looking for. And there's like, make no mistake, these are really hard businesses to understand and to operate. And so I think, that was a giant risk that we took in the early days, always believing that the long tail of this was big.
Let's talk about that. So 20% default rates. I'm assuming, in this space, some of that's organic, right? I think it was almost, there was some really interesting almost quote or phrase where, part of Shopify churn is organic. They actually want to fund or they want to fuel that because it's brands or these entrepreneurs trying new things, a new brand start, and then they don't work. So how much of that is natural or natural to the model? But also, I think it leads to the second piece. What did you see? What were the reads that you saw in the market to say, okay, I actually think this brand, has the traits for success versus this other brand?
Yeah. And the crazy part about data science is like you get better every time you keep going.
With
And
more
as
data,
the model, as you get more and more data, you start to get more and more clever. So here's what I can tell you. In the early days, what we figured out is like unit economics really matter. And it's my best advice for a D2C founder. Like every day you need to know, like, I have a basket size of $100. I have product costs of $30. I have, first time acquisition costs of $30. After delivery, after everything, after the world's on fire, I always make $10.
Yeah.
And the closer you are to that confidence, and really optimizing for it, those are the businesses that really get to scale. Then you add a rebuild component to that, or some level of consumable, or some level of loyalty that's pretty strong, and you can get absolutely killer D2C brands. And so this is the interesting part: is we started there. We knew that was indicative, and then we started pulling in more and more signal. And this is the honest answer, I can't even tell you all of the things that we look at now that are highly indicative, because that's the part about great machine learning models is that they learn from one another, and it's no longer like Michele and her hypothesis is on like what should matter here. It's actually what our data is telling us over time.
So the other thing that started exploding overnight, which also, it also seems like when I talk to a lot of times the Clearbanc brands, are these subscription businesses. And so, and it's interesting, I've been talking to a few of these bigger direct consumer subscription businesses, and they're saying now subscriptions are 30, 40, I even heard 50% of some of their businesses. And I'm assuming their LTV is going through the roof when you have 40, 50% of your business coming from these recurring subscriptions, and then you're just managing churn and then your acquisition costs at that point. And where do you see the future of these subscription businesses? And do you think, like, for example, subscriptions could be one of the best fits for like a Clearbanc model?
I mean, we love subscription businesses. We've funded a lot of them. And I mean, I think that as an entrepreneur, you're always looking for, how do I start January 1st with X number of dollars already in the bank? And it makes it so much easier. And here's the other thing that I would look at is, like, it's really confusing as an entrepreneur in general to understand what matters. And like, I would say most of the time, everyone's like, oh, measure what matters. You're drowning in metrics. We are now such analytic driven companies. I have a report for I probably have a report for how often our bathrooms were used when we could make one when we were in the office before. Like, you can literally measure hundreds of ways that eyeballs are tracking and people come back and all of this. But and so it actually gets overwhelming. I actually bring our team back to one thing all the time for every business. They say this on Dragon's Den all the time. Your number one metric that should matter is retention. Because in business, I believe, and sometimes it's fooling, sometimes it's way more innocent than that, but you can convince anyone to do anything once, for the most part. It is not hard. Like you have to get someone's attention to do something once. But you can use all sorts of tricks in the book to get a single transaction, but people rarely do things a second time if you didn't genuinely add value, or if they didn't genuinely like you, or if it didn't genuinely make sense for your business to do so. And so much of any business, whether it is D2C, whether it's a delivery business, whether it's anything, can be measured on the retention of your customer base, right? And we do this to ourselves. We think we are being really unsuccessful if people come to us for capital to fund part of their business, and then they don't continue to use our capital and our network and our advice and all of the other things that we can do. We measure that internally as we're somehow failing our founders. And I think the best products in the world do that. And so if you can think about something, and you get a little bit of a bump on consumables because we use them or we eat them or they somehow disintegrate in our homes. But I think it's a great single metric to look at when you're building a business.
It's fascinating. I think with Uber, for example, when you were looking at their cohort growth,
Yeah.
not only did they have, good retention, but the cohorts would grow over time.
Yeah.
And initially, when I know a lot of like VCs who passed on early rounds of Uber, and they said, well, the taxi space isn't that big, it's very fragmented and things like that. And the way it changed was it changed how you move in cities. And
Yeah.
now you were taking more
Change behavior.
trips than
Yeah.
you would have before. So I guess as it
Yeah.
looks at the direct to consumer side, are you buying, more consumables than you were prior? So is that average order value over time increasing? So and when you have that cohort growth, and I know like for Deliverr, what made us so
Yeah.
appealing for like the venture community was that these brands would grow more and more over time as they added fast shipping. They could obviously
Yeah.
acquire more users, they could retain their users better, and things like that. When we look at, it's fascinating because this space has obviously been exploding overnight over the past few years, and you have these people playing in the ecosystem like Clearbank, and then you also have some of these Shopify apps like Recharge, Bold Commerce, Gorgeous,
Yeah.
all these guys who are just
Yeah.
funneling this GMV. What we're starting to hear a little bit around saturation or diminishing returns, where how many maybe sustainable shoe brands can you have in a
Right.
certain segment? Where are you, or are you even seeing diminishing returns, or are you more of the school of thought where there's always more upside, there's always an audience out there on Facebook and
Mhm.
Instagram or TikTok, you just haven't found it yet, or that's where it needs to be invested in? So where are you starting to see the diminishing returns, or are you seeing that at Clearbank today with certain verticals?
Really, really good question. So I try and look at things on a far more macro perspective than like, is Allbirds stealing sneaker share from Nike, or is
Yeah.
consumers generally buying more sneakers? First of all, let's talk about sneakers. One of the things we have learned about sneakers is people have an infinite capacity to consume sneakers, because now we have secondary markets for sneakers and drops for sneakers. And like,
That's right.
like, we can actually see from our data, like collectibles grew by 300% last year. Everyone found a hobby of things to buy on the internet, whether that was cards or NFTs or sneakers or something. So that was like one thing. And I think that's really a lot out of boredom. I think there would be two other things. I look a lot at how consumer spending is doing, period. And I think I worried at the beginning of COVID that we would see a dip in consumer spending, which would then therefore affect all e-commerce brands. Instead, governments decided to print the most absurd amount of money we have ever seen, and we have seen consumer spending go absolutely nowhere. And so for D2C brands, that's an amazing thing. And it looks like we will probably make a recovery from that as well. So I look at things like that and this incredible shift. I mean, we're still, depending on whose numbers you use, like, pre-COVID as a percentage of retail sales, e-commerce was maybe
insane.
13 to 15%. Maybe we're like in the 20s. I think in the next decade, we're going to see the first country, which I think will be China, to get to 50% e-commerce sales.
Yeah.
And so I think we're asking the wrong question if we're like, are people saturated on sneakers? People are not saturated on the internet. I think that's really the macroeconomic trend that are going on. And then it's your job as a founder to look at the things that are fueling some of these bigger trends. And so one of them in consumables that I think has been huge is just generally health and wellness. People have now taken their health way more seriously than ever before. They're looking for all sorts of things that they're willing to pay. I have like 3 fitness trackers. Now I compare the like Whoop Band to the Oura Ring. I'm like, is this even helpful? I don't even know, but like I'm addicted to these things. So these movements are not, I don't think they're going anywhere. Second question you asked is, are we getting diminishing returns on channels? And I think we're seeing, and we're showing in our data, people should look at our Black Friday report that we did last year, because there was some really interesting data, because we have such a huge swath of D2C brands and how they're spending and what's working is, we have seen Facebook take the first decently major decline since I've really been in e-commerce, because I was there in the early days. I was truly buying newspaper ads and billboards to send to an e-commerce site in the early days. So I remember like when Facebook launched mobile app downloads, and we were one of the first buyers of like how effective this was to do this. And so there's going to be a lot of shifts this year, like between the iOS 14 and them losing some of their tracking. I think Google's announcement on this their cookie being changed. That is going to be big. So what this means for brands is that there is a whole new world that just opened up in terms of creativity. So, Pinterest is going to have very different places to look for customers. TikTok is going to have very different places to look. And instead of thinking about I'm getting diminishing returns on Facebook, it means that all these ad arbitrages are going to change very, very quickly right now.
Yeah.
And so it's a really good time to be investing in being creative.
Well, there's a lot of pieces that I want to dive into. Let's start first on the changing ad landscape. So I want to talk a little bit about TikTok. Obviously, it's exploded onto the scene. We have, for example, one of the biggest TikTokers in the world is Josh Richards. He uses his brand Annie Energy on Deliverr. The guy's got, awesome. I think we were looking at his followers. He has 1.5 billion interactions with his content on TikTok. So something like some big population of planet Earth has seen him with his drink on TikTok. What do you think about that landscape as it relates to these direct consumer brands? We also had a really interesting marketplace pulse, looked at the most searched product on Amazon, and it was TikTok leggings. So what do you think about that? How do you think that's going to factor in? But then also the thing is with TikTok, it is so, that real estate is full screen audio and video, so it can be pretty expensive. Which brands do you think are going to work on TikTok, and what do you see as the upside there?
I mean, full attention, full screen, full audio, full video, like that's what you want, and full attention right now. And to be honest, until we are fully vaccinated, people have a lot of time on the internet. That's the other thing, is we are like, people will go back to like having drinks with their friends and going out late and like not needing to be on TikTok for 4 hours at night. But now we're kind of in that moment where that's happening. And so I think even my experience is, even when some of these CPMs look like they're expensive, with the right kind of creativity and the right virality to organic content, brands can do incredibly well when given that real estate. And I think there's now a higher bar to create content. I mean, I remember making my first TikTok and I'm like, this is hard. So you can follow me, Michele Romanow. But it's like, you have to like figure things. You're going to be a little bit of a video editor, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's no longer cool to just do the videos where you like point at the 3 words anymore. Like that's like old news on TikTok now. So I don't know. I if I was a brand, I'd just be very, very excited about this, because you kind of have what every brand wants, which is a lot of people spending a lot of time on their phone, and a lot of people are forming new habits now. And I think as soon as we get, the world starts to open up, people are coming back with a different set of brands and a different set of habits, and they're forming those behaviors now.
And do you think with this type of TikTok content, what's interesting is that you have something around like the top 20 TikTok influencers, control or have this ridiculous amount of reach to the entire TikTok audience. You see that the same with Instagram. Do you think it's a more effective strategy to go to one of these guys like a Josh Richards or one of the D'Amelios to go and produce content for them, or they try to go with some of the more, something going along the lines of like virality, a little more basic on that end?
That's a really good question on influencers versus not. So what's happened over the years on Instagram, which we've followed quite closely in our data, is that people started with like big influencers, and now they're actually finding micro influencers do a lot better, because the content is way more genuine. And so now, if you have, I don't know, well, first of all, you can start with way smaller bite sizes, but let's say you have $1 million to spend. It's actually better to spend that among 100 small influencers that feel very genuine, versus like, here's me, I am an influencer asking you to be influenced by this product that I am getting paid for. That starts to feel very, very transactional. And so the reality is I think it's a way more nuanced relationship with TikTok. I mean, if people that are at the top, because the influencers that are the top of TikTok they're different humans. They haven't actually been as jaded in their career yet, where this becomes as transactional.
That's
so if
right.
you can get them
to
make really real and genuine content with massive audience sizes, of course that's going to be a better bang for your buck. I think it's all around like the curve of jadedness, right? Like, am I doing this to be interesting? Am I doing this because it's like genuinely cool that I get to interact with these products and I really like this? Or am I just looking at the zeros on this and I'm happy to like say whatever? And so there's probably some of those early opportunities because, these folks are so new. And then, I mean, look, it's hard to create good viral content. I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to do this. And the reality is you just have to keep trying until something awesome works.
Yeah. And so going back to the earlier point, we were talking about, diminishing returns and talking about the growth of e-commerce as a whole. What's really interesting, and some of the things we're seeing here at Deliverr, and maybe you're seeing it as well. These direct to consumer brands, it seems like every time there is an influx of traffic, like you saw with the beginning of COVID, now like what you're seeing in the past 30 days, everyone's considerably up with all the stimulus money coming in, vaccination rates and things like that. It seems like the direct to consumer brands are growing at a faster rate when the market is up than the average, than some of these marketplaces. How do you think these new Shopify brands like an Allbirds or some of these really fast growing ones that are on Clearbank, how do you see them interacting or competing with some of these traditional, really at the top level, top 20 retailers in the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first thing is that there's been a return to brands that feel very authentic, right? I think of a brand like House, who's one of our great founders that we've been able to back, or Magic Spoons. I mean, these brands came off as incredibly authentic because they were like, Helena lives on a farm. She was like, most alcohol has garbage in it. And it's, McDonald's quality. And I'm going to make things that if you're going to drink, you're going to feel a whole lot better because I'm going to drive the quality through the roof. And so that story is immensely resonating, and she gets to own and build that audience on her own and not have to go to a retailer. Even some of the biggest retailers on the internet, when you see some of their internal numbers, it's like 50% or higher of their traffic can be driven by Google AdWords. And so at the end of the day, I think, and then the second thing that really happened that was a great side effect of COVID is we started caring about local businesses a whole lot more than we ever have before. I mean, I think in every city around the world, we saw those like horrible pictures of when you look at one of the cute little streets and you see 40 photos of basically boarded up stores.
Yeah.
And so consumers taking their money are also caring about, these smaller brands as well that have really tried to be disruptive and to make things better. And so I think it's just generally, if you're thinking about starting, the customers today, I think, are far more forgiving because they kind of all understand like it was not perfectly easy in this pandemic. But they're actually looking for that now, as opposed to looking for like, okay, this is kind of the tried, tested, and true multi-conglomerate product that probably has things in it that I don't want to have in it. So I think, I don't know, it's a great moment to rise, and we'll see. I mean, you tell me how the bigger retailers are doing. Like, that's one of the things that I've really realized is that, unless you're Amazon, you are actually paying a lot to drive, individual pieces of traffic on a per item basis.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think they compete on a different, I think when you think about the selection graph, you have your head selection, body and tail selection. I think these direct to consumer brands are starting to really build out the body selection, where they have this, a branded story like you mentioned with Magic Spoon, and some of the others, where it might not be an everyday essential like Crest toothpaste, but it has a story around it. It might be healthier, or there's added benefits, premium type product. And then when you look at the head selection, that gets into a very different landscape, where then that's your Crest toothpaste and that's some of these other things. Now what's interesting is that you're getting guys like DoorDash and Instacart now starting to play into that space as well. So I think when you look at the head selection, Walmart came up with Walmart Plus. You have obviously Prime One Day now, and now you have Instacart Essentials, DoorDash Essentials, or I think it's called Dash Mart.
Yeah.
So that space is getting really interesting. And I don't know how direct consumer brands will kind of interface into that everyday essentials world. I think this is gonna be really interesting. But yeah, I think for the body selection and tail selection, you know, the growth is what the growth is. I mean, they are.
Right.
I've been talking to a few of these, you know, $100 million, $200 million Shopify brands, and they refer to themselves as marketing machines.
Right.
And instead of, oh, we're a retailer, no, we're a marketing machine. You know, we can acquire users extraordinarily fast. We can retain users extraordinarily fast. And we're building really, you know, branded products, high quality products that have a good story behind them. So it's interesting.
What's cool to like pick up on that is that, you know, you can say the word marketing machines, but the word they're actually looking for is like analytic machines. And when we used to like go to people's offices, like you'd walk into these office and you're like, wait a second, this is a marketing team run by quants. And for basically the history of humanity, marketing teams were run by creatives. And this doesn't mean you don't need incredible creatives. It just means that the ratio, marketing used to be 100% a creative game. And now I think it is 20% amazing creative, 80% incredible quantitative analysis. And so it's going to be incredible to see what will happen, because look, Google and Facebook had these incredible tools and had enormous audience sizes and could really give those to advertisers. Obviously, that is very much being threatened and taken away either by their competitors, either by a bunch of different things. And, you know, I've been public on this view before, but I think that generally consumers should have complete control over their privacy. You can choose what data you give to companies or not. But this need we are getting in America to break up our tech companies for the benefit of consumers, I think is a false narrative, because tech companies are big. They get more effective the more data they have. And America is not competing against America. America is competing against China. And so the Chinese companies, we are not breaking up Tencent. They are not breaking up those companies. And so, you know, we will have a world where we will have a broken up series of companies in America. We will have the Chinese companies be more powerful. And that means every jurisdiction that between China and America compete for, the Chinese companies will have the advantage. And I think we really need to think about, as America, if we want our companies to win or not. And that's where I think a lot of this gets lost in the narrative, because the Chinese government is not having the conversation with Alibaba or with Tencent about breaking up those businesses. And those businesses are frankly, you know, Amazon, Google, and Facebook put together.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, with Amazon and Google and Facebook, they've enabled so many millions of businesses to grow, and that employs so many people. It's obviously a really tricky position, because they obviously have a lot of data, but that data is being used for these businesses to be able to grow really fast. I think when you look at, you know, with Facebook, with Google, they are now starting to get into this idea around social commerce. And so, you know, the traditional model was, and this was very different from the Chinese landscape with e-commerce, where you know, you would go on to WeChat, you could transact, you know, within the WeChat app. You know, in the United States, it developed differently, where you would discover a product on Instagram, Facebook, Google, and you get redirected to the website, you know, the Shopify store, BigCommerce store, and things like that. And now these guys are starting to look at, okay, can we put the transaction on our platform? And now part of that, and part of the initiative, at least that Zuck talked about, is as you see the iOS changes rolling out more and more, you know, this is going to help by having the transaction on the site. Now, he mentioned over 1 million businesses are on Facebook shops. I want to ask you, what do you think about, you know, the engagement on these platforms? And also, how do you think brands view it? Because I know brands, you know, they obviously love these platforms as ways of acquiring users. But they also, you know, you mentioned retention is the number one factor in any business. Yeah. When that transaction's happening on Facebook or Instagram, do you have that relationship with the brand, or is that relationship more with Facebook, Instagram, and Google? So how do you think these brands are going to interact with social commerce, and what do you think the future holds for that?
So are you getting, I haven't followed, are you getting the email when you transact now on Facebook and Instagram?
No, you're not. Well, you cannot, you cannot subscribe for updates from that brand, I think, due to privacy concerns today.
Huh. Well, it's going to be a brand new group of challenges. So
Yeah.
I think, again, we're just changing the game of chess a little bit, right? So, and it's a new set of constraints, but it's also a new set of customers. And so effectively you step back and you say, okay, is what I'm gaining in conversion rate because I'm eliminating a click. They don't have to set up an account. People can go a lot faster. And what hopefully I'm retaining through as a social follower or something else that I can build a community around, going to equal the value that I would have, acquiring that customer, having them as my own, being able to more effectively retarget and talk to them. And that's really the math that these brands are going to have to do. And I think it's way too early for us to see how that is probably going to
So almost like, so you're, yeah. And that's kind of how I've thought about it, at least initially. It's almost like you're viewing it as like selling on Amazon or selling on Walmart, more around that area than more an extension of your store. Until you can get some of these other things like
that's true,
email
but remember that like social networks are places you naturally build communities. So you still have that like you don't really follow a brand on Amazon. You know what I mean? Like you don't like look for Amazon for inspirational content on like the lifestyle of like, I don't know, this beautiful looking flip-flop company, right? Like it's like, I need a pair of flip-flops because I'm going away tomorrow. So please ship these to me in the next 3 hours. So I actually think there's a little bit more natural community because you're coming from social media. And so you might be able to build a little bit more of that as well.
And what do you think about for these direct consumer brands as they obviously start scaling? How do you think they should interact with Amazon, and what should be that relationship? Or what have you seen works well? What have you seen doesn't work well? Obviously with Amazon, you have this massive buyer base in the United States. Something like 40% at least of GMV goes through Amazon. Should these direct consumer brands be, selling on Amazon early on? Should that come later? Or should they just be, scaling across their existing site?
So we have really encouraged our brands to do diversification in 3 big areas that I think have mattered the most. The first area of diversification is you shouldn't just have one source of getting your products, right? If you have one factory and that goes down and there's a problem, you have a very big problem as an e-commerce brand. And so again, all 3 of these you can do at different stages. The second place we really care about is diversification with ad platforms. I have seen a lot of brands get to, 10, even $50 million on just Facebook. I mean, you can do that, but I don't think that's your wisest move because you are literally going to feel every time an algorithm shifts or change. And there's way more arbitrage if you start learning Pinterest and TikTok and all of these other platforms way earlier. I understand all this is work, but we're talking about building the most robust business you can. And then the third place that I really believe in diversification is on platform. There is a real benefit of having a Shopify or a BigCommerce or a Magento store. There is also, I think, an equal benefit of having people that can easily find you on Amazon. When I have a brand that I love and I can't just like put them on Prime and do that, I think that a lot of brands are scared of that. But as soon as you get a brand that's strong enough where people will just search for your brand, not the generic product, that's really the differentiation you're making is like, am I competing when someone types in the word leggings or am I like Michi leggings, right? Like those are 2 very different things. That platform diversification makes a big difference. And I think it's when I think about building like an incredible brand, those are the 3 things we really try and encourage our founders to do. And I get that they're not easy, but when I get the nicest thank you notes, it's people that say stuff like that. Like, I am so glad we weren't dependent on just one thing. And those are your 3 kind of big areas where you can get, really fragile.
And what would you say would be your number 1 piece of advice for e-commerce founders?
Oh, man. Number 1 piece of advice. Let's do 3. So I think the first is like start with product. You can market anything in the world, but ultimately like you got to build something that when people put it in their hands, they tell people about it. Second thing is like know your numbers inside and out. The same way you said these marketing teams, they are analytics teams and they are really strong. And the world is just getting more and more data driven in this way. And the third is like go back to retention and go back to like if people tell their friends, if people come back to you for more, if people wear out whatever you just sold them and they come back to buy another one, those are really good signs you're onto something good.
Yeah, yeah. So looking at retention, looking at cohort growth, looking at NPS, that all makes sense. So, looking back at Clearbank, obviously you guys have grown so fast. You mentioned 4,000, for over 4,000 merchants. You've invested over $1 billion. Could you see, and what's interesting is when you talk to a lot of these direct consumer brand founders, is they don't just have one. I think when they find a model that works, they have 2, 3, 4, 5 different brands. They just keep launching them. Do you see a future where you do invest in people, or where you do maybe create an incubator or an accelerator of sorts?
Yeah. So I don't think we're ever going to build e-commerce brands ourselves. We want to be the layer that helps power all of these incredible founders and brands, and have done a ton of stuff to encourage this. So it took us a year to figure out how to back really early stage companies. I'm talking like $1,000 of monthly revenue. People said we couldn't do this. This project almost failed, 16 times. And then we were able to launch Clear Angel a couple of months ago. Yeah. And so we will give founders their first 25 grand. It's a better deal than Y Combinator. You give us 2% of your revenue for 4 years, and then we are off your cap table and done. And with that, we have brought so much automated, advice and network to that, where we can make a ton of early stage introductions, where we can show you all of the metrics that are going to matter and all of your kind of OKRs that are going to get you from that early stage, going up. And then, we launched what I think is really powerful is like a valuation tool. So now companies can know what their businesses are worth. There's so many more options. I mean, founders used to know what their businesses were worth twice in their life. Once when they went to go fundraise, and once when they tried to sell their companies. And the processes still took 6 to 8 months. Now we can show on a week-to-week basis, like, this is how well your business is doing. This is where you should be looking for growth. These are some partners that can help you. And so I think we want to go way deeper. And how do we enable, with 20,000 companies on the Clearbank platform today, we want to get to 2 million. And I think this is a huge area for growth. I think all of these economies are not going to restart with physical businesses. They are restarting with digital businesses. And we're excited to be, a little part of that reboot.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Michele. I appreciate it.
It's great to be here with you, Michael.